This is Gavin Newsom.
And tune in for more with Dr. Phil.
Well, look, I appreciate everything you said, but I also appreciate the spirit that behind it. And I think, look, it's one of the reasons we started this podcast. And it's been really interesting, Dr. Phil. It's really underscored the nature of, and you've talked a lot about cancel culture and this incapacity to be willing to engage people you may disagree with, and as you say, focus on the things we have in common. But it's interesting how quick people are to judge and how quickly we are all judged. I imagine just the response you got coming out of that Madison Square Garden rally. I imagine just now your sort of foray with ICE and maybe just a little bit more into the political realm, how quick people are to judge. And so I think it's incredibly important because divorce is not an option. We're all in this together. And you know, it's becoming more and more exhausting. And as you have rightfully highlighted, you did it in your book, We've Got Issues, the nature of social media and algorithms and what's going on in terms of how things have become weaponized and how we are increasingly feeling out of control, isolated, disconnected from larger sense of purpose, meaning, all the things you've been talking about in your show and the work you've been doing. And so just on that, what more can we be doing? What can we be doing to soften the edges of this discourse and begin the process of being repairers, proverbially, the breach?
Do you think freedom of speech is under attack?
I think it is. And I've made this point. One of the reasons I have long admired Bill Maher and gone on his show a dozen times since my mayor days is I didn't like the way he was being attacked. The freedom of speech, his expression was being attacked on my own UC campuses. I've watched cancel culture, never been a champion of cancel culture. Of course, I've seen it on all sides. We saw it with Bud Light. We saw it with Target last year. You know, it occurs, you know, there's boycotts all the time coming from both prisms, the political parties. But I think it's out of control. And I think it's something we need to push back against and we need to own up to.
You know, it seems to be worse in California than, you know, I've moved back to Texas and, you know, no place is perfect, but, you know, I see things like, what was it, Berkeley, where Ann Coulter got canceled. They said It was for security concerns. You can always have security, but
that Milo guy, I can't remember his name. I remember sort of the peak of that cancel culture.
You know, why do you think that is? When I went to school a long time ago, but we always, if somebody was coming that we disagreed with, I always wanted to go hear what they had to say, so I had ammunition to debate them with or attack their positions with. And you never grow until you disprove yourself, until you find something wrong with the way you look at it. But it seems like in California, we've got the heckler's veto. It's like boo them down or block them from coming. And I see it at Berkeley, UCLA, USC. And it just seems like, how are we ever going to broaden our perspectives if we don't get out of the bubble and at least listen to the other side? You may find out that's exactly why I don't agree with that SOB.
Exactly.
You got to hear them to do it.
I couldn't agree with you more. It needs to be called out. I've been trying to do what I can on that. I mean, be candid. That's why I've been calling out all these book bans. 4,240 books and titles were banned last year in this country. I mean, we're censoring, you know, speech in the boardroom, not just in the classroom. You've got folks are rewriting history. You've talked a lot about that, but on both sides of the aisle. I mean, they were trying to, one textbook in Florida tried to take out Rosa Parks' race and said, oh no, she was just a woman who needed to move her seat. So I think we have to own up to this. And I think, again, there's plenty of fingers to point, or at least plenty of people that we can point to. But all of us need to look in the mirror on this issue. I agree with you.
Has California taken a position on transgender athletes? I hadn't seen what the latest.
Well, it did in 2013. In 2013, Governor Brown signed a bill allowing for people to participate. As you know, that issue is very raw and emotional, and it's obviously very pointed this moment because of some state championships. There was 2 bills in the California legislature, Dr. Phil, just a few weeks ago. Neither got out of the committee to change that rule. So it currently is law in the state of California. And CIF that does the intercollegiate does all the sports. They're trying to find some accommodation that addresses the legitimate concerns around fairness. And I say legitimate concerns about fairness, and make sure that those that may have been displaced because they were outperformed by a transgender athlete have the opportunity to still participate and be recognized for that participation. We're also just trying to balance some grace, some humility, some humanity, particularly with transgender youth that just want to survive and don't want to be belittled and demeaned at the same time. So it's a very tough issue. And I know you've tackled that issue. I think you've done it reasonably thoughtfully. I think you've tried to find the nuances here, but it's incredibly difficult issue. And I say this as someone who's been an advocate for trans rights, but I do not think it's fair, these athletic competitions. And I've made that point of view very, very public.
Well, this is one of the things where I say that I believe that activists are pushing an agenda. And I've had so many transgender individuals on the show over the last 25 years. And I can tell you that they have said to me on the air and off, mostly off the air, that they wish those people would shut up. These shrill activists that are pushing these extreme positions, they're not speaking for us. They're not speaking for the community at large. And they say, look, we're living our lives, and there are enough challenges as it is without them pushing these extreme controversial issues that we don't particularly ascribe to. They're not helping us. That's something that they're just trying to rewrite biology on, or they're trying to make a battleground, and and they do it effectively. I had Professor Carol Hooven on from Harvard University, and she didn't even do the research. She was just did a meta-analysis on, I think it was 50 plus studies of others that had looked at the biological markers to see whether or not you could balance the playing field among elite athletes. And she looked at if you have testosterone blockers, if you have hormone suppression therapy, and for the required 2 years before and after puberty, looked at every possible way. And the meta-analysis conclusion for good methodology with good right number of subjects, and they concluded you just can't get there. Even if it's 10% difference in swimming competition among elite athletes, as you know,
that's everything.
They measure that by hundredths of a second, oftentimes, fingernail touching the wall. And in a 4-lap race, 10%, they can be down there kicking off the wall, and they're standing there with their arms crossed, waiting for them to make the last lap.
No, it wasn't one of what wasn't the one and forgive me, wasn't she admonished by the administration over there as well for just concluding those?
Completely drummed out of the university. They're transphobic, spawning hate speech.
Yeah. Well, doctor, trust me, I know a thing or two about this. I expressed my point of view. I lost a few. We don't need to have a public therapy session here, but I lost some good friends. They won't talk to me. They're done. I appreciate they felt hurt. They felt that point of view was, somehow diminishing. I, as someone who's been an advocate that I put up against any other elected official, I mean, I have a very strong record, as you know. I think the first time I was on your show was on the issue of LGBT rights, and I've been an advocate for decades and decades. But on the issue of sports and what you just you laid out as it relates to many different factors that are unique and for regardless of puberty blockers, I just think this issue we have to address, and to not address, we are in denial.
Well, that's a good point, because I remember when you were there, and you and I agreed on that. We were both advocates for LGBTQ rights, but this is a bridge too far. You have these elite athletes. These are kids that get up oftentimes an hour or two before school. I mean, they're up at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning working out before school for years.
Oh, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, somebody steps in and bumps them out of the competition. And I hate to see that.
Yeah. Well, which I got 4 young kids, all athletes, wife who was played for the junior national soccer team. I got into college, only got into a 4-year college because of sports. And it's in many ways the reason I'm here. So I deeply appreciate how resonant this issue and passionate this issue is. At the same time, I humbly submit, Doctor, that I think it's been weaponized by some groups. I'm not suggesting by any stretch you have. I think I've listened to you on this topic, and I think you've tried to be very thoughtful on it. Others, though, are a little less thoughtful and have used this in a way that I don't think advanced the larger call that I think you and I are calling for. And that's just finding our common humanity and try to unify with, as you suggest, common sense.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, I think it's kind of identity politics. If you don't agree with everything, you're immediately labeled transphobic. And I think they lose some very strong advocates by throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Well, and I'd be in that category, and anyone who suggests that, they don't know who I am, what I've done. And so I'm very sensitive to the point you just made, and I certainly appreciate it. Look, just on the issues of broader issues that I think just in the spirit of this conversation, when you wrote this book, We've Got Issues, what was this sort of the gateway to the new media company? Was this sort of the transition book? You haven't transitioned on your passion for family as sort of the core unit, and faith as well, which I appreciate your commitment to faith, including your new role under the Trump administration. Just tell us a little bit more in the spirit of that book, what were trying to achieve?
I've always thought, it's funny, they talk about the general category of talk show, and it's really interesting that if you're going to be successful, they really should probably call it listening show, because if you don't listen to your audience and let them tell you what you need to focus on, you're not going to last very long. And we always refer to Hollywood as a 13-week town. And if you get 13 weeks in Hollywood, you're lucky. I was on for 21 years, and they wanted me to renew for 3 more when I said, no, I'm going to go do my own thing. And there was a difference, because across those 21 years, very unusually, I owned my own show, which, as you probably know, that's very rare in Hollywood. The network likes to own the show. But I owned my own show. So I did 3,800 shows, and I owned them lock, stock, and barrel. So that whole library is something I own, and most of those shows are pretty evergreen. And across time, I had a great staff, and for the whole 21 years, I had one executive producer. I had, 5 supervising producers that were there uh, pretty much the whole time. I had the same 7 cameramen for 21 years.
Wow.
For God,
Wow.
I've had the same secretary, or they changed what they call them across the years. She's been with me 45 years. So, I mean, I've had the same team around me. I'm so blessed to have them. And uh, things change, Governor. Think about this. I started in '02, and
Right.
the first text message had never been sent when I started. And think how much things have changed. In
Yep.
like '08, '09 is when they started dropping smartphones on all of us. And I think that's the biggest change in our civilization since the Industrial Revolution. And I know there were kind of 4 industrial revolutions kind of jammed together there, but I think this was the biggest change since mechanization. And
By the way, just speaking of jammed together, I remember being jammed together right there at the Moscone Center in San Francisco in
Mhm.
January of 2007 when Steve Jobs comes out with some damn
Yeah,
device. Little did we know, but what hit, I'll never forget. It wasn't the device, it was that damn app store
yeah.
in July of 2008 that, to your point, changed everything in more ways on more days.
Well, kids were going through life like this, and then all of a sudden they were
Yep.
going through like this. And I and we listen, and for example, the words cyber and bully had never
Mm.
been used together in the same sentence because there was no such thing. And then all of a sudden, I had to start dealing with cyberbullying. And in fact, I went to Capitol Hill. They asked me to come testify on reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And a lot of my testimony was about you have to start allocating some funds to dealing with cyberbullying because it's become bullies used to be in the lunchroom or the gym or the bus docks, but now these bullies follow the children home. They can't get away from it. And and we have to start educating our teachers and start making preparations to deal with this because kids are killing themselves and online predators are getting to our children. And so, it started evolving and changing, and I had to evolve and change with it. And I remember the first interview I ever gave about the Dr. Phil show, Roger King, who was, the biggest force in syndication.
Mm.
Um, he asked me one day without giving me any warning, he was going to make a sizzle reel to go out and sell the show. And he said, "Okay, Doc, what's the show going to be about?" And I'm like, "Oh, a little uh, caught short." And I remember saying, "I'm going to talk about things that matter to people who care. And I
Nice.
want to deliver common sense, usable information to people's homes every day for free." And
Hard to argue with that.
if that doesn't work, then I was busy when you called me. I had things to do. And and I, I've followed that formula
Mm.
all along. And when I sat down to write, um, We've Got Issues, um, it was in reaction to hearing my audience move. I think that's my 11th book or 10th book.
Mm.
I said I was going to write another book, and then I wrote that one. Um, and it was from listening to them, and they were becoming much more socially conscious.
Mm.
Uh, whereas, early on, I was focusing on marriage and family and individual psychological functioning and um, all of those sorts of individual issues. But I saw it change to start to include things like cyberbullying and predators and online scams and things like that. And then of late, I saw them start to really become much more socially conscious about psychosocial issues. And I think it's because they were on the internet all the time. They were reading things that, 8, 9 years earlier, they just weren't available to read. And that's when I say I started being aware that, like, let's say you had some crazy conspiracy theory, some guy in Omaha or something. Well, that wouldn't spread very far because he didn't have the ability to reach anyone. But it's estimated right now that there are between 5 and 10,000 cults active in the United States of America because they operate online.
Yep.
They solicit money online. They get followers online. Then they might have an annual meeting and recruit people in the real world to come to some compound or whatever. And so I started seeing how people were concerned about what was going on at school. And what was being taught at school. Was critical race theory being taught? Should it be taught? Should parents be notified if their children were wanting to change their pronouns? And there were pros and cons about that. I think parents know their kids the best and deserve to know what's going on with them. But people react to that like there's this massive movement in the schools to recruit children into transgenderism. That's just not true. It is a minuscule number of cases in which that's happening, and they talk like there's this huge recruitment. It isn't true. I do think parents should be involved, and those on the other side of the issue say, well, there are a lot of parents who don't react well to that, and so the kids can get kicked to the curb or whatever if they take that home. Well, that's why we have the Department of Child and Family Services. That's why we have these social services to support that. If they got some mouth breather parent who doesn't stand by their child or whatever. So there are two sides to the issue. I get that, but they weren't talking about these things before, and now they were, and that's what moved me to
Genesis.
We've got issues. We've got issues in what's going on in the school. We've got issues regarding our economy. And people talk about we have this inequality of income. I think the problem is we have a quality of income. If you look at all the giveaway programs, and I hear people talking about they want a quality of outcome versus the quality of opportunity.
Yeah, no.
Those are things I can't
count me out on the outcome side. No, it's about the opportunity. We could talk about some of the tax breaks as well. Some of the carried interest is on those subsidies as well. Look, there's so much, Doctor, to talk about, and I appreciate the spirit to which you've engaged with me and our audience. And one of the things I loved about your book, which I did have a chance to read, but more importantly, there's a lot of good life lessons in there. And one of just one of those statements that you made in the book that sort of spoke to me is be who you are on purpose, which is a good way to describe you, this notion of intentionality. But I think that's an important life lesson, is to be authentic, learn from, don't follow others, have some humility and grace, but stand your ground, but also recognize we need to find common ground. And I hope we found a little of it today. And I appreciate your efforts to try to find more of that with Merit Street Media.
Well, I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about these things. I think, like I say, you and I might be on a different side of certain issues and the same side on certain issues. But I think if people could sit down and have civil conversations like this, I mean, that's what it's all about to me. I think it's important to do. And I'm glad you're doing this podcast. I think people get to hear from you and get to know you better. And I think it's I think people are interested in doing that and in knowing you. And I think it's a courageous thing to do because when you open up an unscripted conversation like this, that's a courageous thing to do. It's not campaign speak. It's just letting people get to know you. And you dodged my question. Are you going to run in 28?
That's fate will determine that. But we'll see, Doctor. As you know better than anybody, as a former California resident, I got my hands full in the next year and a half, couple of years.
You're not ruling it out.
I mean, you're not ruling anything out about your future either. So we'll leave it at that. I appreciate you spending time, and I'm very grateful, particularly particularly considering where the heck you are and all the other folks that are vying for your time and attention. So thank you.
Anytime I can spend time with you, I'm proud to do it, honored to do it. And I'll be inviting you to be on my podcast soon, and we'll talk about that and have you weigh in on some big issues. And I hope we can do this again and do it soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Governor, thank you. Best to you.